Many times we've seen the story about how the powerful, the almighty mage, the unit that exists solely to prevent your run from being softlocked at the end in case you have an army of babies. Arc Sage Gotoh comes in at the end game, but is this truly the case? I've been looking into a lot of reasons as to why we usually call it the Gotoh archetype. Gotoh himself states in Shadow Dragon, the original, that he can't really defeat Medius by himself. And when you play it, magic doesn't really affect Medius, so he can't really solo that. He can defeat the majority of the other units on the map, and he is very powerful. But if we fast forward to the iteration of him in the remake, he also states the same thing there, and he definitely cannot defeat Medius. Actually, very few units can. His stats also aren't comparable enough to defeat the other units on that map, making him more of a powerful addition at the end of the game, but not really something that can carry you or prevent you from being softlocked. So if that's the case, how come we continuously keep naming other units that pop up in later Fire Emblems as the Gotoh archetype? Well, for starters, the archetype also disappears up until the iteration of Galzus or Sed or Sias, depending on how you interpret it, in FE5. But Galzus isn't quite the same thing as Gotoh, is he? And neither is Sed, and definitely not Sias. FE6 has Carol, in a similar vein, with enough stats to take out most of the remaining enemies for the final chapters. But he's not magical either, and he also is missable. So why do we believe that they can solo the last chapters or outright prevent us from being hardlocked? The truth is a little different in my opinion. I think the answer truly lies in the next game, Fire Emblem 7, the Blazing Blade, and what I like to call the Athos Effect. What we really believe the Gotoh archetype is actually an experience that we get as Western players seeing Athos for the very first time, and our translation of that into the discourse throughout the community. To confirm this theory, or at least to get some data on it, I use Google searches engine to look up the Gotoh archetype. Now I know this isn't a failsafe and there's obviously other avenues in which I could have found it, but I went for the low-hanging fruit. I started the search on the launch date of FE7 to test the theory that I had, which was April 25th, 2003. And kept going up in a year increment until I can find some conclusive information or something that could indicate when this idea started to get truly disseminated that Gotoh was some sort of an archetype. For the first couple of years, nothing really pops up. Not even a mention of Gotoh. But then, by the beginning of 2010, an obscure GameFAQs thread appears of someone claiming that they don't know if it's an archetype, but proceeds to list some of the classic contenders of the Gotoh category with a vague definition attached. A couple of more years go by with little mentions here and there, some indie websites ranking Gotohs and so on and so forth. But by now, in 2016, a debate has popped up on Reddit about Gotoh and lists of very specific lists of what is considered a Gotoh. On this list are things like Mycen, Galzus, Sed, Carol, Athos, Gifka, Nizala, Nagi, Basilio, and Flavia, and some others. By this point, I'm starting to think that the archetype has maybe disseminated in some way, shape, or form, and now more people are aware of it and they've started classifying specific units as this archetype. Again, some more years go by, little lists here and there. Then, what I believe is to be the true apotheosis of it occurs. Mecha, who has also contributed a lot to the community, video that he released on February 14th of 2020, talking about listing the Gotohs of the series. I think it's super interesting to see the trajectories that these stories take for this archetype. In this video, he proceeds to list the usual culprits, but adds in a few of the late game clerics from New Mystery. This also starts to reaffirm my idea that the archetype was pretty much set solid even before he put this video out. Particularly because he omits the awakening ones and adds other ones that nobody has ever brought up again, such as Elise, Maria, Nina, and Lena from New Mystery of the Emblem. At this point, I stopped doing the research because there's 70k viewership on that video, coinciding with the searches for Fire Emblem increasing in those years, allowing me to imply that the peak demographic, at least for that time, has been reached for people on this subject. At this point, from the information that I've listed above, I think that the setting of the specific Gotohs that we know today was actually set some point in time between the Reddit list and Mecha's video. I don't think Mecha's contributed to the formation of any new Gotoh archetypes because nobody really brings those up anymore, but the one Reddit lists has almost been the consistent ones that are always brought up in conversations. So what's my take on this? To me, the Gotoh archetype does not exist. Or, if it actually does, we've been using the wrong definition for it. If the idea is a unit that can solely carry the endgame, or that significantly warps the difficulty to carry your weaker units, then Gotoh himself doesn't fit this category except in Shadow Dragon, the original. And he doesn't even help to assist defeating the final boss, meaning that his help is only to assist Marth getting to the final boss. In the remake, he definitely can't do any of that, so he's not really carrying that torch at all there either. Jumping on to Sias, he can't do combat in the manner that the other two on this list can, meaning that Galzus and Sed are indeed capable of the feat of carrying the units through the end of the game. However, they're easy to miss. They're so easy that in fact on a first playthrough, odds are you will miss them if you don't know about them. If the idea is to give you a freebie to beat the game, then why would I have to haul low-level Maritza all the way from the beginning until the end to then recruit Galzus? By that point, I either train Maritza and she's strong enough, or I'm just going to miss Galzus. Sed also can be missed easily too if you quickly defeat the chapter on turn 1, or if you don't trigger the requirements for him to be recruited. They are capable of defeating the boss, but how are you supposed to know? They're not given to you freely. It just doesn't make sense that these two would be considered the Gotoh archetype. They are very strong units that come at endgame, but they're not there to assist the player in that category. They're not there to carry your run because they can be missed. Gotoh cannot be missed. But then, right after this comes the true answer. Athos. Athos is indeed the unit that I believe is what the Gotoh archetype is trying to explain. The reason is, Athos is given to you for free, carrying the weapons that are necessary to beat that end portion of the game. It does not matter what your army is at this point. Athos can defeat almost every single unit on that map, and can do so by himself. I have seen many Iron Man of other players with a bunch of units dead by the end, but they only need Athos in order to succeed, along with the main lords obviously. Athos is so strong that he is indeed capable of carrying those final chapters by himself, and the whole idea is that he is inserted so that you cannot get locked out of defeating the final boss, which has a specific stat threshold that can basically defeat any unit that doesn't meet specific speed criteria. This also coincides with the fact that Athos was the first introduction to that very powerful pre-promote at the end of the game that most Westerners saw when Fire Emblem came overseas. Majority of people that started Fire Emblem at that day and age back then started with FE7. Because of that, Athos was their first introduction to a really powerful unit that was capable of carrying the game. I think that part of what happened here is people saw Athos and saw what he was capable of. Somebody made a connection between Athos and Gotoh coming at the end of the game, and because of that, they assumed that Gotoh was also the same idea of being able to carry the end of the game. Now, this isn't a hate at the person that did that. The truth is, humans as a whole are interesting creatures. They're capable of deriving patterns that don't even exist sometimes. And this is an evolutionary trait that occurs because that's just what we're programmed to do. We see patterns in things and it actually helps in our survival. So it makes sense that we would see a pattern. Two old guys coming at the end of the game, but they're not the same type of character. Athos is indeed the one that perpetrated the idea that he can come by the end of the game for free, not be missed, and be able to assist you in completing the game. The ones that I do think come back to this category, and if they were to be considered the Gotoh archetype, which I'm now just going to call the Athos Effect, are Gifka, Tibarn, Kynegas, and Nesala. Those are actually units that I believe fall underneath this category of given to you for free so that you can defeat the certain units on the map. Gifka, Tibarn, and Nesala are given to you at the end of Path of Radiance so they can assist you in defeating the final units of the game in case your army isn't strong enough to deal with all the enemies that come in at endgame, which is a pretty difficult map. The same thing happens for the tower in the next game, but this time they just throw you a huge amount of characters that are super powerful, such as Nyla, Gifka, Tibarn, Kynegas. They just really want you to succeed, so they just eat a bunch of really powerful Lagoos at you. And all of those could basically fall under this Athos category. They're free, they come in, they do their job, they help you beat the game. I do not agree with any other iteration that's brought up of Awakening. Flavia and Basilio aren't really Gotohs at all. They're just good units that come at the end of the game, which is a dime a dozen in Fire Emblem. There are a ton of units that are really strong that come midway or almost at the end that are pretty powerful, and you're like, whoa, this is a nice filler unit. So to fall under this category is a very specific niche that you have to have. And in this particular criteria, I don't really feel that anybody outside of the ones that I mentioned in this video are truly part of the Athos Effect. The conclusion of all this is simple. The real reason we call it the Gotoh archetype is not because of Gotoh, but because of Athos. It's the Athos Effect that basically propels the idea that this archetype exists, pushing it forward, and is what was disseminated across the community because of the exposure of Athos to everybody in the Fire Emblem community at that time. People saw how powerful Athos was and what he could accomplish, and the fact that he can indeed carry the end of the game, that they disseminated the idea based off of a character that previously existed, but isn't quite functionally the same. Every other iteration of the Gotoh archetype also doesn't really fit that criteria in terms of Sias, Sed, and so on and so forth, because they're not really free. The only ones that are truly free are indeed Athos, Gotoh, and the Laguz Royals in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. So what did you guys think? Do you guys also believe that maybe the Gotoh archetype wasn't really what you thought it was? Do you think that the Athos Effect is real? How strongly do you think that the Athos Effect actually impacted the discussion for Gotoh in Fire Emblem itself? Let me know down in the comments. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Leave a like and subscribe. It really does help, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.